So this week, the UN just came out with a report that Israel is deliberately targeting children. So that's a really big claim, and it should be taken very seriously. One of the hardest parts of this conflict, I think, is that people often disagree not only about the facts, but about what the facts mean. And the way we view this report can completely change the meaning of it. So in this video, I want to talk about the main question that I think is at the core of actually understanding this report. So I wanted to get this video out quickly because I think understanding this framing and unpacking it quickly is really crucial to understanding the report. I'm not going to go through it line by line, but I did start a conversation with ChatGPT to do just that, and it was quite provocative and interesting, I think. So I'll put a link to that in the comments. So, were kids targeted? So we do know that a lot of Gazan civilians were eliminated. That's a fact. It's well known. What does it say about intent and about this conflict overall? So I've heard it said by this Jewish writer. He was encouraging supporters of Israel to really take ownership and accept the fact that the IDF is going to act immorally at times. And he references this idea of psychopaths, which I think is very interesting. So first of all, it's important to understand that for Jews and Israelis, this is an existential war. This is about safety in the Jewish and Israeli psyche overall. And that causes a certain framing or a certain approach and even a certain justification for actions within a war. But that doesn't mean you can ignore the reality. I believe it's important, even when I feel justified in something, to take ownership of what's wrong on my side, to take ownership of my faults. So this writer uses this example of psychopaths, that 1 to 3% of any given population, any population of people in the world are psychopaths. And if you use the number that at any given time, let's say it's around 100,000 IDF soldiers are operating in Gaza, you can do the math and understand that anywhere from 1 to 3,000 people in there are psychopaths. They have a moral standard that is different from yours or mine, most likely. And again, that's any society. That's if any army is operating in any location. Bad things are going to happen in a war zone. Taking ownership of that reality is really important. And calling oneself and one's society to account. And it doesn't necessarily have to completely discount your side. That's what I think happens here, is we take acknowledgement of misdeeds as some sort of acceptance of this global fault. And that's where I think it's actually completely flipped, that taking ownership and acknowledging the faults further supports the moral argument on one's side. So that's important for supporters of Israel to acknowledge Israel's misdeeds. But there's a flip side to this also, and that would be the critics of Israel taking these immoral actions that do happen and using that as some sort of argument that there's a systemic fault, that Israel as a whole wants to commit evil towards Gaza. And that's what leads me to the central question that I think is crucial to reading this report accurately. So we can separate the reading of this report into two main ideas, and one is these specific incidents. Do these specific incidents happen? And the answer is yes. It's very difficult to prove intent, but we can say at the very least that there have been a lot of civilian casualties, and children. That includes children. And the second question is that intentional, and is that systemic? So I want to jump in here and address this for a second, that the reason that I'm bringing up these two questions or these two ideas is because I think it's easy to assume that if the first one is true, the second one also has to be true. And that's not necessarily the case, especially because of the emotional nature of this topic. It's awful, it's heartbreaking, and therefore it's easy to hear that civilians have been eliminated and then assuming that it must be intentional because that's such an evil act. And that's what I'm really trying to address in this video. There's another clash here that I want to explore briefly, and it can help us understand how intentional these acts actually were. So I'd say this clash has to do with ideology and tactics. It's unavoidable that this conflict is incredibly ideological. There's a deep ideological war happening here, and there's a faction of the Israeli population that believes that this land belongs to the Jews and should be conquered by force, that the Palestinians don't belong here, and all sorts of ideas like that. It's certainly not the whole of Israel, but it's a growing voice within the population. There's actually a civil war-esque divide within the country that's been bubbling since even before October 7th. So among the military troops, the Israeli troops that are in Gaza and have been in Gaza, there are people that adhere to this conquest-oriented ideology. And logic would tell us that if immoral actions are happening, it's likely coming from this population, or just from complete neglect, or from people with psychopathic tendencies. So I think it's important to understand if this ideology of conquest is a bug or a feature of the Israeli military approach, or if it's an ideology that's simply allowed to run rampant. So thinking about it from this angle and asking this question can help us understand how intentional and how direct these affronts are on the Gazan civilian population. And a different explanation that kind of comes from the other side of this is more tactical in nature. This idea of human shields has been discussed so much that I think it's actually lost meaning. Like it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. But it is a reality of Hamas's tactics towards warfare.
This is my favorite response. Well, you know, they're using kids as human shields. It's like, well, you got to work around that.
Can it be worked around? There has absolutely been an enormous amount of Hamas military infrastructure that has been found to be embedded in civilian populations. You don't have to do much Googling to find this, and I'd encourage you to do so. A lot of the Israeli hostages were held in tunnels, while some were held in civilian homes by civilians. And I've actually heard firsthand accounts and seen pictures from friends that I know that were in Gaza of tunnel openings into children's bedrooms, for example. There have been weapons and other things of that nature found in hospitals and schools, journalists and UN employees that were doubling as Hamas operatives. So I think it's a very fair question to ask if it's possible to truly protect the Israeli population while fully being able to protect the civilian population in Gaza. And the IDF is constantly making judgment calls of how much they're going to protect their soldiers versus Gazan civilians in any given military situation. And at times it's very difficult to protect both simultaneously. And now, just from my personal perspective, I served in the IDF, I've been covering this conflict for over a decade. I've seen the way the military operates in Israel. And there's good people and there's bad people. And there's things that people do that are moral and good and upstanding and go above and beyond. And there's things that people do that are very morally questionable. And at the end of the day, I think maybe we think of an army as this completely organized thing, top-down authority structure, etc., etc. But it's really executed by individuals that at times it's hard to hold fully accountable. There's a lot of fog of war and difficulty in situations. And individuals do act out and do bad things. And I think an excellent example of this is when the IDF mistakenly eliminated Israeli hostages. They were fleeing a building. I think they were even shouting, like, you know, hands in the air, and were making it very clear that they were hostages. But somehow, in the chaos of war, they were still shot and eliminated by the IDF. Friendly fire. And these are some of the very unfortunate realities that are faced in a wartime. And I think that's really what I want to emphasize in this video. My job is never to tell you what to think. I'm trying to help explore the framing and the different angles that we can look at this conflict to really understand the reality of what's happening and promote the most moral outcome for everybody, for all sides. And I really think that understanding these clashes and these things that are at odds help take a report like this that it's very easy to react to and to really understand what it means within the context that it exists. A very ugly war in a very difficult tactical situation by humans that are ideologically motivated on a million different sides. So I hope this has been helpful in pulling back a little bit and understanding how to view this report and kind of the ideas that are at odds here. So stay tuned for more content like this, evaluating topics like these and all the nuance and context that I can bring.